The great arena on Zephyria Prime buzzed with excitement. Thousands of alien beings filled the massive stadium, their voices creating a thunderous roar that echoed off the metal walls. Today was the final day of the Galactic Combat League tournament, and warriors from across the galaxy had come to prove their strength. General Krextar stood in his private viewing box, his massive reptilian frame casting a shadow over his smaller aides. His green scales gleamed under the arena lights, and cybernetic implants glowed blue along his spine. As the commander of the Vorthak Empire's military forces, he had conquered 17 star systems. Few beings in the galaxy were more feared than Krextar. "The fighters are impressive this year," said Commander Zektol, his aide. The smaller Vorthak held a datapad, reading information about each contestant. Krextar nodded as he watched the warriors prepare in the staging area below. The Gorlonians were easy to spot, massive creatures that looked like walking boulders. Their rock-like skin could stop laser fire, and their fists could crush steel. One of them was practicing by punching holes through thick metal plates. Near them, the Nexari fighters moved in blurs of motion. These four-armed assassins were so fast that most beings couldn't even see them move. Their silver skin reflected the arena lights as they performed impossible acrobatic moves. In another corner, the Etherean mind warriors sat in perfect stillness. These pale, thin beings didn't need weapons. They could move objects with their thoughts and break minds with a glance. One of them was making a heavy training dummy float in the air, spinning it like a toy. "And what about the others?" Krextar asked, scanning the staging area for more competitors. "We have Saurian bone crushers, Helixian acid spitters, and 3 destroyer-class Mechrons," Zektol replied, reading from his list. "Each one could level a small city." The crowd's noise suddenly changed. The excited roar turned into confused murmurs, then scattered laughter. Krextar looked down to see what had caused this reaction. A small figure walked into the staging area. Compared to the other fighters, this being looked incredibly fragile. It had pale skin, dark hair, and wore simple black clothing. No natural armor. No visible weapons except for a few basic tools on its belt. No extra arms, no glowing eyes, no signs of genetic enhancement. "What is that pathetic creature?" Krextar asked, leaning forward. Zektol checked his datapad. "It calls itself Marcus Chen. Species designation, human, from a planet called Earth, in the Outer Rim." The laughter from the crowd grew louder. Some aliens were pointing at the human and making jokes. The massive Gorlonian nearest to Marcus looked down at him and snorted, a sound like rocks grinding together. Human? Krextar had never heard of such a species. "What are its natural abilities?" "According to the registration data, none listed," Zektol replied, sounding confused. "No enhanced strength, no natural weapons, no psychic powers. It seems to be completely ordinary." Krextar stared at the small human below. Marcus Chen stood calmly among the giants, showing no fear despite being surrounded by beings that could tear him apart without effort. The general had seen many species in his military campaigns, but this one puzzled him. Why would such a weak creature enter this tournament? Krextar wondered aloud. The arena announcer's voice boomed across the stadium. "Citizens of the galaxy, welcome to the final day of competition. Today, 8 warriors will battle for the ultimate prize." The crowd cheered as spotlights illuminated each fighter. When the light hit Marcus, the cheering turned to laughter again. Some aliens in the stands were already leaving, thinking the tournament would be boring with such a weak participant. "First we have Gornax the Unbreakable," the spotlight showed, the largest Gorlonian who raised his massive fists. The crowd roared approval. Next, Silith Fourblade of the Nexari. The silver assassin moved so fast she appeared in 4 different places at once. The audience gasped in admiration. The mindbender Vexthor of the Etherean Collective. The pale being didn't move, but every piece of loose metal in the arena began floating. Aliens cheered nervously. The announcer continued introducing fighters. A Saurian warrior covered in bone spikes, a Helixian whose acid saliva melted the ground where he stood, and others that made the crowd scream with excitement. And finally, the announcer's voice carried a hint of amusement, Marcus Chen of Earth. The human stepped forward into the spotlight. Unlike the others, he didn't show off any special abilities. He simply stood there, calm and ready. The laughter from the crowd was so loud it almost drowned out the announcer. "Look at it," Krextar said to his aide. "No claws, no armor, no obvious weapons. What does it plan to fight with?" Marcus carried what looked like primitive projectile weapons and some basic tools. To beings who had energy weapons and natural killing abilities, his equipment seemed like toys from a less advanced civilization. "The betting odds should be interesting," Zectol noted, watching his datapad update. 10,000 to 1 against the human. "Those odds are too generous," Krextar laughed. "I've seen Gorlonians tear apart battle mechs. That little creature will be crushed in seconds." Down in the arena, Marcus walked to his assigned starting position. The other fighters towered over him, casting shadows that made him look even smaller, but something about his movements caught Krextar's attention. The human moved with a strange kind of confidence, like a predator that knew something its prey didn't. "General," Zectol said quietly, "should we place a bet on the tournament winner?" Krextar was about to suggest betting on Gornax the Gorlonian when he paused. Something about the human bothered him. Not fear or worry. The creature was obviously no threat. But there was something in its eyes when the camera focused on its face. A look that Krextar had seen before in the eyes of his most dangerous enemies. "Not yet," he decided. "Let's watch the first round before we waste our credits." The arena floor began to change, rising and falling to create a complex battlefield with walls, trenches, and obstacles. This wasn't just a simple fighting ring. It was designed to test every aspect of a warrior's abilities. Marcus examined the changing terrain with the same calm focus he had shown since entering. While other fighters roared challenges at each other or displayed their powers, the human simply observed and planned. "Citizens," the announcer called. "Let the tournament begin." The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. Aliens screamed the names of their favorite fighters. Bets were placed on everything from who would win to how quickly the human would be eliminated. But in his viewing box, General Krextar found himself watching the small human more closely than any of the obvious champions. Something about Marcus Chen didn't fit with what he knew about weak species. In his long military career, Krextar had learned to trust his instincts about danger, and right now, those instincts were telling him that there was more to this human than met the eye. The tournament was about to begin, and the general had a feeling it would be far more interesting than anyone expected. The first round began with a thunderous crash as Gornax the Gorlonian smashed through a stone wall like it was made of paper. His opponent, a Helixian acid spitter, tried to dissolve the massive creature with streams of green liquid, but the acid simply bounced off Gornax's rock-like skin. "Impressive," General Krextar said, watching the Gorlonian grab his enemy and throw him across the arena. The Helixian hit the far wall with a wet thud and didn't get up. The crowd cheered wildly as Gornax raised his fists in victory. The first match had lasted less than 30 seconds. Next came Silith Fourblade against a destroyer-class Mechron. The robotic warrior stood 3 meters tall and was armed with plasma cannons, but it might as well have been a statue. Silith moved, so fast that she seemed to be in multiple places at once. Her forearms worked like a deadly machine, striking weak points in the robot's armor. Sparks flew as the Mechron systems failed one by one. "The Nexari are always entertaining," Krextar commented as the robot crashed to the ground in pieces. Vexthor the Etherean faced a Saurian bone crusher next. The psychic being didn't even stand up from his meditation position. As the Saurian charged forward with bone spikes extending from his arms, Vexthor simply looked at him. The bone crusher stopped mid-run, his eyes going blank. Then he turned around and walked out of the arena without saying a word. "Mind control," Zectol noted. "Very effective." "Indeed," Krextar agreed. 3 quick victories for the obvious champions. Then it was Marcus Chen's turn. The human's opponent was a mid-level Saurian warrior named Croxtall, not as large as the bone crusher but still twice Marcus's size and covered in natural armor plates. The Saurian had razor-sharp claws and could spit streams of paralytic venom. "This should be over quickly," Krextar said, leaning back in his chair. I almost feel sorry for the little creature. The arena shifted again, creating a maze of walls and corridors. Both fighters started at opposite ends. The crowd expected Croxtall to charge through the maze and tear the human apart. But Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of preparing to fight, he immediately climbed onto a wall and disappeared from view. "What is it doing?" Zektal asked, confused. Croxtall roared and began smashing through walls, looking for his opponent. The Saurian's powerful claws tore through stone and metal like they were made of soft clay. But every time he broke through to where he thought the human was hiding, he found nothing. "Coward!" someone in the crowd shouted. "Fight like a warrior." Other aliens began booing. This wasn't how combat was supposed to work. Warriors faced each other directly and proved their strength. Running and hiding was dishonorable. Marcus appeared suddenly on a high ledge, holding one of his primitive weapons. He fired several shots at Croxtall, but the projectiles bounced harmlessly off the Saurian's armor. "Pathetic," Krextar said. "Its weapons can't even scratch that armor." But then something strange happened. Small objects that Marcus had thrown earlier began releasing clouds of gray smoke. Within seconds, the entire maze was filled with thick fog that the arena's cameras couldn't see through. Croxtall roared in frustration, swinging his claws wildly at shadows. The crowd could hear the sounds of combat, crashes, scrapes, and occasional cries of pain, but they couldn't see what was happening. "This is boring," complained an alien in the general's viewing box. "How can we enjoy the fight if we can't see it?" When the smoke finally cleared, Croxtall was on the ground unconscious. Marcus stood over him, breathing hard but clearly the winner. The Saurian had several small wounds in the joints of his armor, places where his natural protection was weakest. The crowd fell silent, then began arguing loudly. "How did that happen?" "The human cheated somehow. Those weapons were too weak to hurt a Saurian." General Krextar stared at the arena in confusion. He had watched thousands of battles in his military career, but he had never seen anything like this. Marcus had won not through superior strength or obvious skill, but through methods that seemed almost random. "Replay the fight," he ordered his aide. The viewing screen showed the battle again in slow motion. Krextar watched carefully as Marcus moved through the maze. The human seemed to know exactly where his opponent was at all times, even through walls. His shots weren't random. They were designed to create specific ricochets and angles. He studied the terrain, Zektar realized. Every wall, every corner. He knew how sound would travel, how the maze was built. "But that's impossible," Zektal protested. He only had a few minutes to look at it. Marcus advanced to the next round, but the crowd wasn't happy. They wanted to see displays of raw power, not what they saw as trickery and cowardice. His next opponent was a smaller Mechron, built for speed rather than destruction. The robot moved fast and carried energy weapons, but it fought in predictable patterns. Marcus watched it for the first few minutes of the battle, dodging and avoiding attacks. Then he began to change his own movements. It was subtle at first, but soon Marcus was moving in a way that seemed to predict exactly where the robot would attack next. When the Mechron fired its weapons, Marcus was never where the shots landed. "It's learning," Krextar said quietly. "What do you mean, General?" "Watch its movements. In the beginning it was reactive, responding to attacks. Now it's predictive, moving before the attacks happen." The human began using the arena's obstacles in ways that seemed impossible. He bounced his projectiles off multiple surfaces to hit the robot from unexpected angles. He used gravity and momentum in ways that turned simple movements into complex attacks. When the Mechron finally fell, sparking and broken, Marcus had barely been touched. The crowd was getting angry now. This wasn't entertaining. It was confusing and frustrating. They wanted to see strength triumph over weakness, not watch some small creature use strange methods to defeat obviously superior opponents. 2 victories, Krextar mused, both against enemies that should have crushed him easily. For his third fight, Marcus faced an Etherean mind warrior. This time, surely, the human would be stopped. Mental powers couldn't be dodged or deflected. The psychic assault would break his mind instantly. The Etherian began its attack the moment the round started. Other species that had faced psychic assault always showed the same reaction. They stopped moving, their eyes went blank, and they became puppets. But Marcus kept moving. The Etherian's pale face showed confusion. It increased its mental pressure, but the human continued to act independently. Marcus seemed to be talking to himself, making random jokes and humming strange songs. "What is happening?" Zektal asked. "I don't know," Krextar replied, but his voice carried a note of concern that hadn't been there before. The psychic being tried harder, its forehead glowing with effort, but instead of controlling Marcus, the Etherian began to look strained and confused. The human's mind seemed to be somehow chaotic and resistant to control. When Marcus finally approached and simply touched the Etherian, the psychic collapsed immediately. Mental exhaustion had overwhelmed the alien after its failed attempts to control what seemed like an uncontrollable mind. 3 victories, each one impossible in its own way. General Krextar was no longer amused. He was beginning to feel something he hadn't experienced in many years: uncertainty. This small, weak-looking creature was defeating enemies using methods that didn't make sense according to everything he knew about combat. "General," Zektal said quietly, "perhaps we should research this human species more carefully." Krextar nodded, his eyes never leaving Marcus as the human prepared for his next fight. Something was very wrong here, and the general was starting to suspect that the joke might be on them. The semi-finals arrived with only 4 fighters remaining: Gornax the Gorlonian, Silith Fourblade, and surprisingly, Marcus Chen. The 4th fighter was another Etherian named Zixmoth, considered one of the most powerful psychics in the galaxy. "General," Krextar had spent the break between rounds researching humans. What his intelligence officers found troubled him more than he wanted to admit. "General, the data on this species is very limited," Commander Zektal reported. "They're from a planet called Earth in an unexplored sector. The planet appears to be what our scientists call a death world." "Explain," Krextar commanded, his attention fully focused now. "The planet is hostile to life in almost every way: extreme weather, natural disasters, predators, diseases. Most species that evolved there should have died out millions of years ago." Krextar studied the data screen. Earth looked like a nightmare, a world of constant danger where only the strongest could survive. How did such a weak species develop on such a world? "That's what concerns our scientists, sir. According to the data, humans weren't the strongest species on their planet. They were actually quite weak compared to most of their world's predators. Then how did they survive?" Zektal's expression was troubled. "They adapted, sir, constantly. They learned to use tools, to work together, to change their behavior, based on new threats. Our scientists say they're the most adaptable species they've ever studied." Down in the arena, Marcus was preparing for his semi-final match against Zixmoth. The Etherian was floating in meditation, its pale form glowing with psychic energy. This being could break mountains with its mind and had never been defeated in mental combat. "Surely this human cannot resist such power," Krextar said, but his voice lacked confidence. The match began differently than the others. Zixmoth didn't wait or test its opponent. It immediately launched the strongest psychic attack it could, manage enough mental force to shatter most minds instantly. Marcus staggered but didn't fall. His eyes lost focus for a moment, then cleared. He shook his head like someone waking up from a bad dream. "Impossible," breathed Zektal. The Etherian tried again, pouring more power into its mental assault. This time Marcus did something that made the crowd gasp in shock. He laughed. "It's trying to make me scared," Marcus said, loud enough for the arena microphones to pick up. "But I've been scared before. Hell, I was scared when I got up this morning." Zixmoth's glowing form flickered with confusion. Fear was one of the primary tools of psychic control. If the target wasn't afraid, the attack became much harder. Marcus began talking to himself as he had before, but now the audience could hear his words clearly. Remember that time in Afghanistan when the mortar rounds were coming down? Yeah, that was scary. Or when Jenny broke up with me, that sucked. Oh, and that time I had to give a speech at my sister's wedding. Now that was terrifying. The human was deliberately thinking about random, chaotic memories. Each thought pulled his mind in a different direction, making it impossible for the Etherian to maintain focus on any single mental pathway. Human minds are chaotic, Krextar realized. They don't think in straight lines like other species. Sixmoth was straining now, its form flickering as it tried desperately to break through Marcus's mental defenses. But the human kept changing his thoughts, jumping from memories to songs to random observations about the arena. Nice architecture, in here, Marcus commented, dodging a floating piece of debris that the frustrated Etherian had thrown at him. Very spacious, good acoustics too. The psychic being's attacks were becoming wild and unfocused. It had never encountered a mind that refused to be controlled not through strength, but through sheer randomness and chaos. Finally, Marcus did something that no one expected. He walked straight toward the floating Etherian, ignoring the psychic pressure that should have been crushing his mind. You know what your problem is, Marcus said conversationally. You're trying too hard. Sometimes you just have to relax and go with the flow. When he reached Zixmoth, Marcus simply reached up and touched the alien's ankle. The contact broke the Etherian's concentration completely. The psychic being crashed to the ground, unconscious from mental exhaustion. The arena fell silent. No one had ever seen an Etherian defeated by simple physical contact after a failed psychic assault. Marcus moved on to face Gornax in the final match, but General Krextar wasn't watching the preparations. He was reading more intelligence reports that his officers had compiled. General, we found more information about human warfare, Zektol said nervously. You're not going to like it. The data showed images from Earth's history, humans fighting with primitive weapons against much larger and stronger enemies. Humans surviving in environments that should have killed them. Humans turning every day objects into deadly weapons. Look at this. Zektol pointed to a report. They have something called guerrilla warfare. They deliberately avoid direct confrontation with stronger enemies. Instead, they use hit-and-run tactics, environmental advantages, and psychological warfare. Krextar read the descriptions of human conflicts. These beings had fought wars that lasted for decades, never surrendering even when facing impossible odds. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters that had wiped out other species. They're persistence hunters, Zektol continued. On their world, they hunted animals much larger and faster than themselves by simply refusing to give up. They would chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Days? Krextar couldn't believe it. What kind of creature hunts for days? According to this data, humans have the best endurance of any species on their planet. They can keep going long after other creatures would have died from fatigue. Down in the arena, the final match was beginning. Gornax stood like a mountain of living rock, confident in his overwhelming physical superiority. Marcus looked tiny beside him, but the human showed no fear. The Gorlonian charged forward, expecting to end the fight with one massive punch. But Marcus wasn't where the punch landed. He had moved at the last second, not fast like a Nexari, but with perfect timing. Gornax's fist hit the arena wall instead, leaving a crater in the metal. The impact would have turned most beings into paste, but Marcus was already moving to attack the Gorlonian's exposed side. He's studying the enemy, Krextar observed, learning its patterns. As the fight continued, it became clear that Marcus wasn't trying to overpower Gornax. He was wearing him down. Every attack the Gorlonian made was slightly less powerful than the last. Every movement was a little slower. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be getting stronger. His movements became more precise, his attacks more effective. When his weapons broke against Gorlonian armor, he improvised new ones from pieces of the arena. General, Zektol said quietly, I think we need to contact High Command about this species. Krextar was beginning to agree. What he was watching wasn't just one exceptional individual. This was a demonstration of how an entire species approached combat. They didn't rely on natural advantages or superior technology. They adapted, improvised, and never gave up. For the first time in his long military career, General Krextar was looking at something that truly frightened him. Not because it was immediately dangerous, but because it represented a completely different way of thinking about war. And if there were more humans like Marcus Chen, the galaxy might be facing a threat unlike anything it had ever seen. The final battle between Marcus and Gornax had been raging for over an hour. In the viewing box, General Krextar watched with growing unease as the impossible continued to unfold before his eyes. Gornax, the unbreakable, champion of his species and terror of 3-star systems, was breathing heavily. His massive stone-like form showed chips and cracks where Marcus had targeted the same spots repeatedly with improvised weapons. The Gorlonian's movements had become slower, less coordinated. Marcus, meanwhile, looked tired, but determined. His simple black clothing was torn and dirty, and he had several cuts and bruises. But his eyes remained sharp and focused. More disturbing to Krextar, the humans seemed to be learning and adapting even as the fight continued. "How is this possible?" Commander Zektol whispered. "Gornax has the strength of 10 warriors. His skin can stop plasma cannons." "Watch the humans' tactics," Krextar replied grimly. "He's not trying to break through the armor. He's targeting joints, stress points, anywhere the natural protection is weakest." As if to prove the general's point, Marcus rolled between Gornax's legs and struck at the back of the Gorlonian's knee with a broken piece of metal. It was the same spot he had hit dozens of times before. This time, there was a crack, and Gornax stumbled. The crowd had gone silent. What had started as entertainment was becoming something else entirely. The obvious champion, the being who should have won easily, was being worn down by something that looked like it should have been crushed in the first minute. Marcus found a new weapon, a length of cable torn from the arena's equipment. He began, using it like a whip, not to hurt Gornax directly but to tangle his movements and create openings for attacks. "General," Zektol said nervously, "I've been reading more about human military history. There are some very disturbing patterns." "Tell me," Krextar ordered, never taking his eyes off the fight. "They have a concept called total war. When humans fight, they don't just use their military. They use their entire society. Every human becomes part of the war effort. Many species do that when threatened. Yes, but humans take it further. They weaponize everything. Their factories, their transportation, their communication systems, even their entertainment. In one conflict, they turned passenger aircraft into bombs." Krextar felt a chill run down his spine. "They used civilian vessels as weapons?" "Worse than that, sir. They convinced their own people to do it voluntarily. Humans will sacrifice themselves for strategic advantage." Down in the arena, Marcus had managed to get on Gornax's back. The Gorlonian tried to reach behind himself to grab the human, but his massive arms couldn't bend far enough. Marcus used another piece of cable to create a chokehold around the giant's neck. "Impossible," Krextar breathed. "Nothing can strangle a Gorlonian. Their necks are solid rock." But Marcus wasn't trying to strangle Gornax in the traditional sense. He was applying pressure to specific points using leverage and body weight to create stress on the stone-like structure. Tiny cracks began to appear. "They study anatomy," Zektol continued reading. "Human warriors learn the weak points of every species they might face. They have detailed manuals on how to kill anything. That's standard military practice." "No, sir. Not like this. Humans don't just study military targets. They study everything. How to poison water supplies, how to disable power grids, how to turn an enemy's own infrastructure against them." Gornax was weakening. The constant pressure on his neck was creating fractures in his natural armor. More importantly, the psychological effect was devastating. Gorlonians were used to being unstoppable forces. The idea that something so small could hurt them was breaking down the giant's confidence. Marcus sensed the change immediately. He began talking to his opponent, which surprised everyone listening. "You're tired, aren't you?" Marcus said calmly, still maintaining his hold. "Been fighting for over an hour. That's got to be exhausting, even for someone as tough as you." "What is he doing?" Zektol asked. "Psychological warfare," Krextar replied, recognizing the tactic from his own military training. He's trying to break the enemy's will to fight. It must hurt having all those cracks in your skin. Marcus continued. I bet you're wondering how long you can keep this up, how much more damage you can take before something important breaks. Gornax roared in frustration and anger, but there was something else in the sound now. Fear, the reports on Krextar's datapad painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human warfare. These beings didn't just fight until they won or lost. They fought until their enemies were completely broken, unable to ever threaten them again. General, there's something else, Zekatol said quietly. Intelligence reports from the Outer Rim. There have been sightings of human ships in several sectors. How many ships? Unknown, sir. They seem to avoid contact with other species, but the sightings suggest they're exploring, mapping territories. Krextar felt his blood turn cold. Exploration and mapping were the first steps of expansion. If humans were as dangerous as Marcus was demonstrating, and if there were more of them spreading through the galaxy, how many humans are there, he asked. Zektol checked his data. Population estimates for Earth suggest approximately 8 billion individuals. 8 billion. 8 billion beings like the one currently defeating the greatest warrior in the galaxy through pure stubborn determination and tactical superiority. Down in the arena, Gornax finally collapsed. The constant pressure, the accumulating damage, and the psychological warfare had broken something inside the mighty Gorlonian. He didn't surrender. His species didn't have words for surrender. He simply stopped fighting. Marcus released his hold and stepped back, breathing hard but victorious. The arena was silent except for the sound of his own breathing and the occasional groan from Gornax. The human had won the tournament. Not through superior strength or natural weapons, but through methods that most of the galaxy couldn't even understand, let alone counter. Champion, the announcer called, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. This wasn't the kind of victory anyone had expected or wanted to see. As arena officials rushed to tend to Gornax, Marcus walked toward the exit. He didn't showboat or celebrate. He looked like someone who had just finished a difficult job and was ready to go home. General, Zektol said urgently, what do we do about this information? Krextar stared at the small human figure disappearing into the tunnel. Everything he had seen contradicted his understanding of how warfare worked. Strong defeated weak. Advanced technology defeated primitive weapons. Superior numbers defeated inferior forces. But humans seemed to operate by different rules entirely. They turned disadvantages into advantages. They made weakness into strength. They won battles they should have lost by refusing to accept that they had lost. Contact the High Command immediately, Krextar ordered. Send them everything we've learned about this species. Mark it as highest priority. What classification should I use, sir? Krextar thought for a moment. In all his military career, he had never encountered anything that required the highest threat classification, but as he watched the humans' display of tactics, adaptability, and sheer bloody-minded determination, he realized that the galaxy might be facing something unprecedented. Classify them as a potential extinction-level threat, he said quietly. Sir, but there was only one of them and it barely defeated. There are 8 billion of them, Commander. 8 billion beings capable of what we just witnessed. And they're exploring the galaxy. The implications were staggering. An entire species that approached conflict like Marcus Chen had approached this tournament. A species that had survived. On a death world by being more adaptable and more determined than anything that tried to kill them. General Krextar, conqueror of 17 star systems, realized that he might be looking at the greatest military threat the galaxy had ever seen. 2 hours after the tournament ended, General Krextar sat alone in his private chambers aboard his command ship. The victory ceremony had been a quiet affair. Usually, winning the Galactic Combat League brought cheers and celebration. Instead, there had been confused silence and worried whispers. Marcus Chen had accepted his prize, a simple crystal trophy, with the same calm demeanor he had shown throughout the fights. No speeches, no boasting, just a polite nod before he had asked to return to his quarters. Now Krextar had requested a private meeting with the human, Standard protocol required him to offer the traditional honor of dining with the commanding officer, but this wasn't about protocol anymore. The general needed answers. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. "Enter," Krextar commanded. Marcus walked in, looking remarkably ordinary for someone who had just redefined the general's understanding of warfare. He had cleaned up and changed clothes, but still appeared to be exactly what he had seemed at first, a small, unremarkable being, with no obvious advantages. "General Krextar," Marcus said with a slight nod. "Thank you for the invitation." "Sit," Krextar gestured to a chair across from his desk. As Marcus settled himself, the general studied his face carefully. There was intelligence there, and something else, a depth of experience that seemed strange in someone so young. "I have questions," Krextar began directly. "Your performance in the tournament was unexpected." Marcus smiled slightly. "I imagine it was. Your species doesn't seem to fight the way humans do." "No species fights the way you do," Krextar replied. "I've studied warfare across the galaxy for over 50 years. I've never seen tactics like yours." "Really? That's interesting." Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, despite being in the presence of one of the galaxy's most feared military commanders. "What did you think of them?" The casual way the human asked the question bothered Krextar more than direct threats would have. "I think your species represents a fundamental challenge to everything we understand about combat." "How so?" "You don't fight to demonstrate superiority. You fight to win, regardless of how it looks or what others think of your methods." Marcus nodded. "That's accurate. We learned a long time ago that looking impressive doesn't matter if you're dead." "Tell me about your world," Krextar demanded. "Tell me what made your species this way." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then began to speak in the same calm tone he had used throughout their conversation. "Earth is what you'd probably call a death world, though we just call it home. Everything there is trying to kill you. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the planet itself. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages. How did your species survive such conditions? We adapted. That's what humans do best. We changed to meet new challenges. When it got cold, we learned to make fire and clothing. When big predators hunted us, we learned to make weapons and work together. When food was scarce, we learned to farm." Krextar leaned forward. "But surely other species on your world had natural advantages. Stronger muscles, better senses, natural weapons." "Oh, absolutely. Compared to most Earth predators, humans are pretty pathetic. We can't outrun a charging rhino or fight a bear with our bare hands. We don't have poison or armor or night vision." "Then, how did you become the dominant species?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time, Krextar saw something predatory in that expression. "We're persistence hunters, General. Do you know what that means?" Krextar shook his head. "It means we don't have to be faster or stronger than our prey. We just have to be able to keep going longer than they can. A human hunter can chase an antelope for days, never quite catching it, but never giving up either. Eventually, the antelope collapses from exhaustion, and then it's dinner." The implication sent a chill through Krextar's body. "You hunt by never stopping." "That's one way we hunt. We also use tools. Anything can become a weapon if you think about it the right way. We cooperate in ways that most predators can't. And we learn from everything." "Learn?" "Every failure teaches us something new. Every enemy that defeats us shows us a weakness we can exploit next time. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years, trying every possible way to kill and survive. We've gotten very good at both." Krextar thought about the tournament fights. Marcus had indeed learned from each encounter, adapting his methods to counter different abilities and tactics. "But surely your species must have some natural limits, some point where you admit defeat." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "When," he spoke. His voice was softer but somehow more frightening. "General, let me tell you about something we call the Second World War. 2 groups of humans fought each other for 6 years. Millions of people died. Cities were burned to the ground. Entire countries were destroyed. Many species have such conflicts. Yes, but here's the thing. Even when one side was clearly losing, when their cities were in ruins and their armies were broken, they kept fighting. Some of them fought until literally every last person was dead. Others fought until their enemies had to completely rebuild their entire society. Krextar felt his breathing become shallow. They fought to extinction? Sometimes. And the winners didn't just defeat their enemies. They made sure those enemies could never threaten them again. They changed their governments, their cultures, their entire way of thinking. The humans stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We learned something important from those wars, General. There are two kinds of conflict. The kind where you fight until someone wins, and the kind where you fight until the threat is permanently eliminated. Which kind do humans prefer? Marcus turned back to face him. Whichever kind is necessary to protect our people. Krextar realized his hands were shaking. How many humans are there? On Earth? About 8 billion. But we're expanding now. Exploring, colonizing, growing. We tend to spread pretty quickly once we get started. Why did you come to this tournament? Curiosity, mostly. We wanted to see what the rest of the galaxy considered strong. Wanted to understand how other species fight. And what did you learn? Marcus smiled again. That same predatory expression. That most species rely on natural advantages and direct confrontation. That they fight to prove superiority rather than to eliminate threats. That they have predictable patterns and exploitable weaknesses. You studied us. Of course. Just like I studied my opponents in the arena. Information is the most important weapon in any conflict. Krextar stood up slowly, his massive frame towering over the small human. But for the first time in his military career, size didn't make him feel powerful. It made him feel like a bigger target. What are your intentions toward the galaxy? He asked. Right now? Peaceful exploration and trade. Humans prefer to get along with our neighbors when possible. And when it's not possible? Marcus looked directly into Krextar's eyes. Then we do whatever is necessary to protect our people and our interests, just like any other species would. But the way he said it made it clear that human definitions of necessary might be very different from what other species considered acceptable. General, Marcus said as he moved toward the door, I should mention something. I'm not a soldier or a professional warrior. I'm just a former Marine who volunteered for this tournament because I was curious. Most humans are much better at this than I am. The door closed behind him, leaving General Krextar alone with the most terrifying realization of his career. The human who had just redefined his understanding of warfare was considered average by his own species' standards. Krextar immediately activated his emergency communication systems. The galaxy needed to know that humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered or ignored. They were something entirely new, a species that had survived by being more adaptable, more persistent, and more ruthlessly practical than anything that had tried to destroy them. And now they were spreading to the stars.